Welcome to the deep dive. We take a stack of sources, pull out the key insights, and basically help you get really well informed.
That's the goal.
And today, we're digging into something that, well, it sparks a lot of questions. Despite all the criticism, the accusations, the very public legal battles, why does Donald Trump still have such incredibly fervent loyalty from millions?
It is a puzzle for many. And look, our mission today isn't to provide simple answers, because there aren't any. We want to move past the surface level stuff.
Right.
Explore the really complex mix of psychological, sociological, and cultural factors behind it all. We've got a stack of material here. Anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, political commentators.
A real mix.
Yeah, trying to give you, the listener, a genuinely rounded understanding.
Exactly. And the main sources we're drawing on today, just so you know, include titles like MAGA and the Psychology of Trump Supporters, MAGA Mind, The Mass Psychology of Trumpism, also The Psychological Puzzle of Donald Trump, which reviews 20 different studies, and a pretty recent Guardian piece called The Minnesota Shootings Illuminate the Character of the Trump Era. And just to be crystal clear, our aim here is to pull out the most important insights from all this material. We're not taking sides, especially on the politically charged stuff. Think of this as an impartial report on what these sources are saying.
Okay, so where do we start? That core question.
Yeah, the one you hear all the time, especially from critics. How can anyone still vote for him after everything? And everything is, well, it's quite a list.
It is.
2 impeachments, multiple criminal indictments, state and federal felony conviction, accusations of being a threat to democracy, a misogynist, racist, serial liar, even a rapist. And yet, the loyalty seems solid for millions. It's the stark divide, like you see stats where 78% of Democrats believe Trump broke the law regarding the 2020 election, but fewer than half of Republicans think so. It's like 2 different realities.
Well, this anthropologist, Alex Hinton, he's been studying the Trumpiverse, as he calls it, since 2015. And he makes a really important point.
Which is?
That many people on the left, they just don't get the diversity within the Trump voter base. It's easy to just slap on labels like racist deplorables or, country bumpkins.
Yeah, the stereotypes.
Exactly. But Hinton says, look, while the demographics do skew older, white, rural, religious, less educated, it's not everyone. There are plenty of people outside those boxes. And many, he argues, have quite thoughtful reasons for their choice.
Even if influenced by media or polarizers.
Well, yes, but that's true across the political spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
His point is, don't just dismiss them at hand.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Hinton lays out 5 key lines of reasoning that seem to inform these choices. What's the first one?
Right. The first one is media distortion. Basically, where critics see all those failings and controversies we just listed.
Yeah.
Some on the right see what they call Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS.
Ah, TDS. Heard that one.
The core belief is that left-leaning media just twists everything he says. And for the really hardcore supporters, Hinton notes, it goes further. They might allege fake news outlets, like CNN, are part of some deep state plot.
Wow. Involving bureaucrats, law enforcement.
Yeah, all supposedly trying to upend the will of the people. And this feeling extends, for some, to seeing Trump and even the January 6th defendants as being wrongly persecuted.
Okay, so that's one pillar. What's next?
The second is absolutely critical, the economy. Or, as the sources phrase it, bread on the table, money in the bank.
The classic question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Precisely. And for many Trump voters, the answer is a clear no. They remember his term for, well, tax cuts, economic growth, stock market highs.
Even though overall employment and wages went up under Biden.
Yes, but what seems to stick in people's minds is that massive surge in inflation under Biden. Almost 20% price rise overall. Even if inflation cools, those higher prices at the checkout, they're a daily reminder.
What kind of holes reflect this?
Consistently. Trump leads on handling the economy, and the economy is usually, the number 1 or number 2 issue for voters.
Okay. Media, economy.
Yeah.
What's the third reason?
Immigration. Often framed, quite intensely, as a border invasion.
Right. We hear a lot about the border.
And while the stats show illegal crossings did go up significantly under Biden, though they dropped a bit in July 2024 after a policy change, the perception is key here.
The perception of chaos.
Exactly. There was a poll in 2022, cited in our sources, where 7 out of 10 Republicans worried that open borders were actually a Democratic plot.
A plot to do what?
To replace conservative white people with non-white foreigners.
Wow.
And Trump taps right into this. Concerns about immigrants being freeloaders, not assimilating.
Yeah.
Even completely untrue claims about immigrants eating pets in Ohio.
Eating pets. Seriously?
Seriously. But the point is, for a huge chunk of Republicans, 82% in that 2022 poll, immigration is very important.
Right.
And they strongly back Trump's proposed fixes: shut the border, build the wall, deport millions.
Okay, that's a powerful motivator. What's number 4?
Number 4 is about a proven record, but looking beyond just the economy or immigration.
So his overall track record compared to Biden-Harris.
Yes. A really common point supporters make is there were no new wars under Trump.
Contrast with
Biden-Harris being, as the sources put it, saddled with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Israel's invasion of the Gaza Strip. There's this feeling that American taxpayers are footing too much of the bill, even with allies chipping in.
and China.
And China, yes. The belief that Trump is just better suited to deal with the rising power and threat of China.
Okay, so that's 4. What's the final one from Hinton?
The 5th one is really interesting. It's called the MAGA Bowl in a China shop.
Meaning
Where critics see someone destroying democracy and decency.
Yeah.
Supporters admire him as an unrelenting pugilist, a fighter. Think of that image of him with the raised fist after the assassination attempt in July.
Right, the fighter persona.
They believe he should be elected because he's a fighter. And for some, it goes even further. They see him as a literal savior who's going to rescue America from a radical left apocalypse.
So MAGA isn't just politics, it's like a rescue mission.
For some, absolutely. Saving in America, they think, is on the brink of failure.
That savior idea is potent.
It really is. And it leads us to another, maybe more provocative idea from one of our sources, Philip Chard. He's a psychotherapist.
Okay.
He basically argues that Trump is not a politician and MAGA is not a political party.
Then what is it?
He calls it a personality cult.
A cult, that's a strong word. How do social psychologists define that?
Well, generally, a cult seeks to dominate and exploit its members. It uses psychological manipulation, groupthink, peer pressure.
To create what?
To create a closed feedback loop, an echo chamber. Members are basically immersed only in information that praises them and the movement. Critically, no criticism gets in.
And the leader?
The leader tells them what to believe. It becomes the ultimate source of truth.
Okay, but hang on. Does that mean all Trump supporters are in a cult? That seems like a stretch.
No, and the sources are careful about that too. They identify different subgroups within that loyal base.
Like who?
Well, first, you have people who don't actually buy all the propaganda. They might hear an extreme statement and say, he doesn't really mean it.
You see him as a showman.
Sort of. A showman whose interests happen to line up with theirs. Think maybe some wealthy individuals, oligarchs, like Musk is an example given. Their support might be more transactional.
Okay, who else?
Then you have the single-issue zealots. People driven mainly by fear about one specific thing: abortion, immigration, crime, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That one issue becomes so paramount, it supersedes all others.
So they ignore other things that might normally disqualify a candidate.
Exactly. They just ignore the other stuff. Then, admittedly, you do have the haters, neo-Nazis, and tear-it-all-down wingnuts.
And for them?
For them, MAGA provides a kind of cultural home where their extreme views feel validated, even normalized.
And the last group?
The last group described are the dissonant Trumpers. These are described as decent folks, good neighbors. But they experience this internal conflict, this cognitive dissonance between their own character and their support for Trump.
So how do they reconcile that?
According to this analysis, for them, morality is not part of the Kool-Aid. They separate their personal values from their political choice somehow.
So going back to the cult idea, what are the characteristics psychological studies find in maybe not all supporters, but many MAGA adherents?
Okay, so within that framework, several traits emerge from the research. The leader is seen as the ultimate authority, someone who can do no wrong. There's zero tolerance for criticism. Often, a lack of financial transparency in the movement itself. A tendency to foster irrational fears about other groups and promote baseless paranoid conspiracies.
Demanding loyalty.
Unquestioning loyalty to the leader's truths. And if you leave, you're branded a traitor.
So you have to suspend your own judgment.
Essentially, yes. Suspend independent judgment and opinion. This leads to what's described as a collective narcissistic symbiosis.
Wow, collective narcissistic symbiosis. What does that feel like for the person?
Apparently, quite reassuring, because it erases all doubt. You belong, you're right, and anyone who disagrees is wrong or evil. It simplifies a complex world.
That's a powerful psychological pull.
Extremely powerful. And it connects to specific personality traits researchers found are common among many MAGA adherents.
Like what?
A high degree of social dominance orientation. That's basically supporting a social hierarchy where your group is on top.
Okay.
A preference for authoritarianism over democracy, a strong sense of entitlement, that collective narcissism we mentioned, we're the best. An overactive fear response, yes. And interestingly, something called high BS receptivity, basically, being more susceptible to believing nonsense claims.
And this affects relationships.
Oh, definitely. The sources note that fractured relationships with family friends often follow because these dynamics can be so all-consuming and polarizing.
There's another angle from Dan McAdams, a psychologist at Northwestern, right? A
Alright.
slightly different take.
Yeah, McAdams offers this really unique perspective. He says Trump's appeal comes from him being seen as both more than a person and less than a person.
How does that work? More and less.
Okay, more than a person means he's viewed almost like a mythical character, someone with extraordinary powers used for good against evil. The savior figure again, basically.
Okay, makes sense. But less than a person?
This is the fascinating part. McAdams argues Trump lacks a narrative understanding of himself in time. There's a narrative vacuum at his core.
Meaning he doesn't reflect.
Right. He's rarely introspective, retrospective, or prospective. McAdams says there's no depth, no past, and no future in his self-conception. It's this kind of emptiness that allows people to project whatever they need onto him.
That's a really deep psychological point, and it ties into that big review of 20 studies you mentioned by Eric Dolan. What did that find overall?
Yeah, Dolan's review pulls together a lot of these threads. Some key things for you, our listener, to consider. First, when people perceive society as morally divided, support for authoritarian leaders who promise order goes up.
They're seeking order.
Exactly. Second, Trump supporters seem uniquely characterized by authoritarian aggression and group-based dominance. They accept hierarchy and are okay with aggression to keep it that way.
What else?
There's a link between masculine insecurity, men feeling their masculinity is threatened, and support for aggressive leaders like Trump.
Interesting. And prejudice.
Explicit prejudice actually increased among supporters during his presidency. The suggestion is his rhetoric made it feel more acceptable to express those views openly.
Okay, what about happiness or thinking style?
Interestingly, supporters tended to use more positive language and showed less cognitive complexity, simpler thinking patterns maybe. And this was linked to being happier with their political choices. They also tended to be more cognitively rigid and less interpersonally warm.
And narcissism came up again.
Yes, narcissism is linked to Trump support, especially through anti-immigrant attitudes and right-wing authoritarian beliefs. Supporters often show traits similar to Trump himself: antagonism, indifference.
Do people change their morals to fit him?
It seems so. The studies show voters adjust their moral views to align with their preferred candidate. So Trump supporters would revise their beliefs to reduce the clash with his positions.
Wow. What about that identity fusion idea?
Right. When supporters have that really deep personal connection, identity fusion, they're much more likely to see opponents as existential threats and support authoritarian actions to stop them.
And finally, media.
Yeah, his rhetoric could literally shift media habits. When Trump criticized Fox News, some Republicans actually moved away from Fox towards even more extreme outlets like OANN. He has that kind of influence.
This really paints a picture of a specific psychological profile, or at least tendencies.
It does, and it leads us right into Jeffrey Victor's analysis. He's a social psychologist.
What's his take?
He argues Trump's followers are part of a quasi-religious authoritarian social movement.
Quasi-religious. An authoritarian, how does he define that way of thinking?
Authoritarianism, in this view, sees democracy as basically a disorganized mess. It wants strong men to centralize power.
And the beliefs that go with that.
Things like disapproving of civil liberties for others, believing strongly in social hierarchy, extreme nationalism, deep distrust of foreigners, accepting conspiracy stories.
And a dislike of experts.
Yes, a dislike of intellectuals and experts, the so-called elites, and a tendency to blame liberals for society's problems.
You know, Victor also talks about this being distinctively American, right?
Yeah.
Not imported.
Exactly. He stresses that both democracy and authoritarianism have deep, distinctive American roots. This isn't new. It's an internal dynamic.
How does it show up historically?
It often expresses itself through racist and religious beliefs. Think racist stereotypes, beliefs about secret conspiracies run by evil people who work for Satan.
Examples.
He points way back, New England settlers and indigenous populations, the witchcraft trials,
Yeah.
then later rising fascism before WWII, like the German-American Bund, Father Coughlin's anti-Semitism, then the Red Scare, McCarthyism.
Whose effects we still see.
Absolutely. Echoes and claims about Marxists and radicals today. And he notes American authoritarians tend to prefer symbols like, baseball hats and these religious revival-like camp meetings, not military uniforms like in Europe.
So how do people come to believe things that seem, well, untrue from the outside, like those conspiracy theories?
Victor explains it as consensual validation of reality. It's the echo chamber effect again.
Hearing the same things over and over.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're surrounded, family, friends, social media, by people repeating the same untruths over and over, you gradually come to believe them. Social pressure is incredibly powerful. It can literally distort an individual's sense of reality.
And it builds on existing beliefs.
Right. That's the perceptual set idea. People's existing political and religious preconceptions make them ready to believe Trump's lies because he cleverly appeals to them.
Plus, trusting the source.
Huge factor. Trust in a chosen authority. If Trump is your trusted source, you're primed to accept what he says.
And fear plays a role again.
A massive role. Fear of crime, dangerous immigrants, economic troubles. Trump is seen as having prepared the ground by hyping those fears.
So fear plus repetition.
Fear plus repetition in those closed networks leads to unquestioning belief. Think of the claim about immigrants taking jobs. Victor likens the mechanism to how Hitler's propaganda worked. And when you're scared or stressed, critical thinking just gets harder.
And this authoritarian group, though maybe not the majority of supporters, has outsized influence.
Yes, that 40% or so who hold strong right-wing authoritarian beliefs, they tend to wag the dog. They have concentrated voting power and are sometimes associated with threats of using violence.
But what about the other 60%? The ones who aren't necessarily authoritarian in that psychological sense?
Right. For many of them, the support seems to come more from those shared social stresses we touched on earlier, the frustrating life conditions caused by big cultural and economic shifts.
Can you give some examples of those frustrations?
Sure. Things like the economic decline and decay in small towns, rural areas. You see high rates of addiction, overdoses, youth suicide, churches emptying out.
And in cities?
The loss of those well-paid job opportunities for non-college educated factory workers. That hits hard.
What about resentment over wars?
Yes. Lingering resentment over Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. A feeling that lives were lost for no apparent good reason, and sometimes blaming political liberals for disloyal opposition, which erodes trust in government generally. It's compared to the mood in post-WWI Germany.
And all this creates nostalgia.
Exactly. Nostalgia for an imaginary, more tranquil, harmonious past, which, of course, Make America Great Again taps right into.
There are other resentments, too, right?
Definitely. Resentments over perceived insults. Non-college workers resenting the college-educated. Rural folks resenting aid going to big cities. And many white people resenting what they see as undeserved advantages for black and brown minorities.
So when you put all that together, what is it that these followers really want, beyond just policies?
Well, excluding the opportunists and maybe the purely party-line voters, many seem driven by moral ideals. And the core moral belief uniting a lot of them, especially the religious traditionalists, is identified as white Christian nationalism.
That fusion of Christianity and nationalism.
Yes, rooted partly in that anti-communist Red Scare history. They're disturbed by the separation of church and state, falling church attendance. They want laws to enforce traditional Christian norms.
Like on abortion or school prayer.
Exactly. It's a callback to that imaginary past again.
So the ultimate desire is...
For many, especially those traditionalists, the single most important thing that they want isn't a specific policy. It's a powerful savior to restore society to that imagined ideal.
And Trump fills that role.
He stepped right into that dramatic savior role, and it generated this quasi-religious fervor we keep hearing about.
And this desire for a strongman savior, it connects to the potential for violence.
It does. Authoritarians are drawn to authoritarian leaders. And some studies suggest some authoritarians might share traits associated with antisocial personality disorder, megalomania, narcissism, lack of empathy, paranoia, risk-taking, vengefulness. Traits some psychologists also attribute to Trump himself.
How does this potential violence manifest?
In different ways. Anonymous death threats. these disturbed lone wolves who attack perceived evil enemies,
Hmm.
and also the more organized macho groups, the right-wing militias like Proud Boys, Oath Keepers.
And the polling on accepting violence is worrying.
Very. That 2023 PRRI poll, finding 23% of all respondents believe true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save our country. That's nearly 1 in 4. And it jumps to 46%, almost half among those who believe the 2020 election was stolen.
And Trump doesn't need to order it explicitly.
The sources argue he merely has to imply what he wants done. And that is seen as a fundamental threat to American democracy.
The Minnesota shootings you mentioned earlier, that's presented as a real-world example of this.
Exactly. Sidney Blumenthal's article uses it as a dramatic illustration. Vance Luther Bolter, an abortion opponent, evangelical Christian, registered Republican, attended Trump rallies.
And he had a kill list.
Yes, including Democratic officials. It's presented as a chilling case of extreme belief, potentially leading to violent action.
And the reaction afterwards was also revealing.
Extremely. This immediate right-wing swarm of disinformation. People like Mike Cernovich, Elon Musk, Laura Loomer spreading falsehoods.
And Senator Mike Lee?
His tweets stood out, suggesting the killings were somehow the result of Marxists. Blumenthal calls it depraved humor, meant to own the libs, and crucially argues Lee knew that what he was doing was malicious.
And Bolter himself. More came out about him.
Yes, it turned out he was actually on Governor Walz's own kill list. And his background graduated from this place called Christ for the Nations Institute.
With a rather disturbing slogan.
Yeah, a founding slogan was reportedly, everyone ought to pray at least one violent prayer each day. The school also had historical links to anti-Semitic groups and later Christian identity. Bolter had given sermons talking about the enemy, getting into people's minds regarding sexual identity.
It paints a picture of a true believer.
It does. And Blumenthal contrasts Bolter, the true believer, maybe a loser in Trump's terms, with Senator Mike Lee.
Lee's transformation is quite something.
It really is. From being a vocal Trump critic in 2016, remember, he slammed Trump over the Ted Cruz JFK conspiracy thing, religious intolerance, demanded assurances against autocracy.
To becoming a huge supporter by 2020.
Yes, comparing Trump to Captain Moroni from the Book of Mormon.
Why the change? What was the rationale?
A staffer apparently explained Lee's thinking with an analogy. You get behind Trump because he's being assertive. And maybe more cynically, the odds are lower that they'll be hurt if they get behind him.
Pragmatism over principle, perhaps.
That's the implication. And Blumenthal draws this stark parallel. Bolter and Lee, both men in a mask, both profess to be men of faith using the authority of the law. One allegedly commits murder, the other hooted at it.
Both worshiping at the shrine of Trump.
Yes. Their parallel lives intersect under Trump, and Blumenthal argues this illuminates the true character of the Trump era. Two very different paths converging in the same place.
So this whole movement, how is it actually organized? It sounds complex.
Jeffrey Victor describes it like an ecological system. Lots of parts, not always directly connected, but they work together.
What are the parts?
First, claims and claims making, those public grievances, the conspiracy theories blaming out groups. Second, the communication channels, internet, TV, radio, print. Third, supportive associations, parties, churches, militias. Fourth, supportive authorities, leaders who legitimize the claims. Fifth, public meetings, rallies, protests, even riots to show public power. And sixth, the financial support, big donors, and small-dollar mass donations.
It's a whole ecosystem reinforcing itself.
Exactly. Which leads to Victor's final conclusions, which are pretty sobering.
Okay, let's recap those.
1. Authoritarian episodes. They're frequent in U.S. history and will continue. This isn't a one-off. 2. Trump's followers. They're in a quasi-religious authoritarian social movement. 3. Where are they concentrated? Groups high in authoritarian beliefs, less educated, rural South evangelical Protestants.
4.
4. Many followers are reacting to those frustrating cultural and economic changes, looking for that strongman savior and an imaginary better past. 5. The religious culture. It's white Christian nationalism with roots in the Red Scare.
And crucially, it persists.
6. Yes, that cultural stream of authoritarian belief will persist in American society, regardless of whatever happens to Trump and his followers. And finally, number 7. Why do millions believe the lies? Because they fit existing religious and political preconceptions, because they trust Trump as their source of truth, or simply for social acceptance within their group.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot to take in. We've covered everything from media perception and economic anxiety to deep psychological traits, historical roots of authoritarianism, and even potential for violence. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And understanding these layers, why these narratives hold such power for so many, seems pretty crucial right now.
Definitely. It moves beyond just outrage or confusion.
Absolutely. And maybe just to leave you, our listener, with something to think about.
Mm.
If these underlying drivers, the cultural currents, the psychological needs for certainty or savior, are deeply rooted and likely to outlast any one person, how might understanding that change how you think about political divides, or how you might even try to engage with people across those divides in the future? Something to mull over.